Last week, we're going to pick up on a thread we were at last week. And last week, we talked a little bit about this idea of the importance in this season of learning how to strengthen ourselves in the Lord. This morning, are you guys strong this morning? Are you strong in the Lord? Even if you're not totally convinced, are you strong in the Lord today? And that's an important feature. And I believe it's something the Lord wants to teach us about strengthening ourselves in the Lord. As you guys know, the last couple years have been an interesting couple years. In fact, this would be the first official weekend that there hasn't been masks, in the county of Boulder in 2 years. So it's interesting. We've just been in this time in this season the last couple of years, and you've probably felt that it seems like we've been living in a little bit of a fog. This collective fatigue is another way of saying it. Some of the fatigue has been from adversity and overwhelm, the amount of things coming at us. And that's a new thing for us in our particular part of the world. There's other parts of the world that are very used to adversity, and they have developed the muscle of learning to seek the Lord and learning to press in and doing whatever it takes to be with each other and to fan the flame of faith. There's other parts of the world, they don't have to work as hard as we do. And so the gift of God in this season is He's actually developing the muscle of resilience and perseverance. That we don't need somebody to hold our hands in order to go seek Jesus, but He's teaching us how to fight for ourselves and to press into more of the Lord. Somebody better start shouting down the preacher right now, because I just believe that God, He wants to teach us how to enter into a new strength in Him. And it's not just strength that comes from self-improvement. It's a strength from strengthening ourselves in the name of the Lord and knowing who He is and who we are in Him. So some of that fatigue the last couple of years has come through the overwhelm and adversity. Some of it, the fatigue, is just not knowing what to be passionate about. You ever feel like you're with people that are constantly trying to invite you to be passionate about what they're passionate about? And I love it. It's actually a good thing. I love passionate people. I really do. But over time, when there's so many things to be passionate about and causes and things and whatever, that it creates a little bit of a thing of what do I give myself to? But for those who are following in the way of Jesus, the part of the call here in this season is to be unmistakably zealous for Jesus, unmistakably zealous for the Lord. And I believe that's what He's teaching us. He's teaching us to anchor ourselves into Him, deeply rooted in His presence, and that is how fatigue is transformed into fresh fire. And so Jesus, He offers us that invitation. He says, come to me. We talked about that last week. He says, come to me, those who are weary, heavy laden. I'm going to give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. And it's an invitation into a new kind of rest. But it does involve, there is an invitation. It does require participation. It says, come to me. And it's a new kind of rest that He invites us into. And it's not a passivity. It's not a checking out. It's not, I'm going to teach you to vacation really well. I'm going to teach you how to totally zone out, That's not what He's talking about. He actually says, I'm going to put you to work. It's going to be a different kind of work. I'm going to put a new kind of yoke on you. You're going to have a yoke on you, but it's going to be a yoke that brings life. So you're going to participate in me. I'm going to show you how to walk with me in a new way. And it's going to be a kind of work and a kind of life and a kind of living that doesn't exhaust you. It actually adds energy and renews you from the inside out. Don't you guys want that? That is the way of Jesus. The way of the world is exhaustion and depletion and the sucking dry and the vacuuming of our inner souls. And then trying to escape it every chance we get. That is not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is a new kind of life in the kingdom where He teaches us how to live from the rest, from Sabbath rest. We're going to talk about that more over the next several weeks. But for today, we're going to pick up. Last week, we also examined the life of King David. See, King David knew this even before Jesus said, come to me. King David in the Scriptures was a man who knew how to come to the Lord and knew how to present himself to the Lord and to strengthen himself in the Lord. So when he faced tremendous loss, he learned, as we looked at last week, it says that he strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And he did lament his enemies and his losses. He wrote some songs about it. You can read about it in the Psalms. but he did not adjust his life to hopelessness. He did not settle down into a new standard of hopelessness. He acknowledged what he was feeling, but then he reminded himself that there is a reality of life in the presence of God that I am called to live in, and that's what he gave himself to. David was a worshiper and a fighter. He was zealous for the ways of the Lord. He was jealous for the glory of God. He was resilient in his worship. He had thick skin and a tender heart, which is much better than soft skin and a hard heart. So that's just a word for us today. It's much better to have thick skin and a tender heart than soft skin and a hard heart. And I believe that's what we learn when we look at the quality of pursuit in the heart of David. He was so after the heart of God, it so moved the heart of God that God actually made a covenant, we'll read later. He makes a covenant to David that says, listen, through your line, I'm going to establish a kingdom through your seed. I'm going to establish a kingdom. It's actually not going to end. The government it'll be a throne that never ends. And I'm going to build a tabernacle. I'm going to finally build a home that I want to dwell in. And so that's how God was moved by the heart of David. And I believe that we're in a time as we're as we're moving forward. I believe that the Lord is wanting to restore the heart of David to us, his church, the heart of the warrior worshiper, the ones who are fighters, the ones who are resilient and zealous for the things of the Lord. The Lord wants to put a new fight in our bones. Anybody could use a little more fight in your body? Not a bad kind of fight, a good kind of fight. But the kind of fight where you're not willing to settle for less than what the kind of life that Jesus came to bring. The kind of life that he gave his life for. You guys with me? All right, so open your Bibles this morning. We're going to start in 1 Chronicles 13. We're going to just ease back into the life of David, and kind of the working question is, how did he develop strength? It doesn't quite say what he did. In the passage we read last week, he just made there was a decisive moment where he said, this is what's coming against me, and he strengthened himself in the Lord his God. There's no instruction manual for that. But today we want to look at some other decisions that he made for himself and for the sake of the people in Israel that I believe are important for us if we want to take some steps in the same vein. And so what we're going to do, again, we're going to start 1 Chronicles chapter 13, but where this is at in the scriptures, if you're not familiar with David, he was a young shepherd boy. He was a teenage boy when the Lord found him. He spent his days tending to sheep and defending lions and bears. And the Lord, after God had anointed Saul to be the first king of Israel, Saul's heart turned from the Lord. He was not able to sustain the call of God in his life because he just turned to his own ways, and he just did not honor the Lord. And so the Lord went and told Samuel the prophet to go find another. And so he's led to this band of brothers, David being the youngest, this ruddy young boy that came from the fields. Nothing particularly astonishing about his stature or who he was. But the Lord does not look at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. And God says, here's a young man who knows me, who's after my heart, and my anointing will be upon him. So he's anointed right there, but they still had to kind of wait the thing out. God has an order. So Saul continues to be king, but sooner or later it all catches up with him. Him and his son Jonathan are killed in battle. And then a transition happens with David. And so David's ready to be anointed king over Israel, over Judah. And a few years into his new kingship, his new reign, he decided that it would be a good idea to go get the ark of God's presence and bring it back to the center of the nation. He knew that the presence of the Lord was his strength and their strength, right? Before Saul had become king, the ark had actually been captured by the Philistines, and we know that the ark of the covenant, the ark of the presence of God, this was in the Old Testament. This was the habitation for God on earth. This is where his manifest presence was among his people. And it was intended to be the centerpiece of his people, the chief identity, the rallying point, the centerpiece of the table. But before Saul had become king, the ark was actually captured by the Philistines, and somewhere near the beginning of Saul's reign, the ark was recovered, but kept in a side town, Kiriath Jearim, at the house of Abinadab. Everybody say Abinadab. It's just fun to say. There's no spiritual significance to you saying that, but it's just a fun word. The house of Abinadab for nearly 40 years. And so it was not in the center of the nation. It was somewhere else. And David knew that needed to change. So let's read first 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 1. It says this: David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, with every leader, and David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers to remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as to the priests and Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. Then they let us bring again the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. Just kind of flag that one. All the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. So again, this was probably years into David's reign, but this prompting, this idea comes forth, hey, let's go out, let's gather the nation, the priests and Levites, let's bring in the ark of God back into the city of David. And because we did not seek it in the days of Saul. So David, he wants to bring the ark close because they did not seek it in the previous generation. And part of the reason they did not seek the Lord's presence because it was peripheral to their lives, not central to their lives. It was peripheral. And so when something is peripheral, we do not give it the attention it deserves. And so David says, no, for us to seek the Lord, he has to be at the center here. So we're going to continue in verse 7. It says this: they carried the ark of God and a new cart from the house of Abinadab and Uzzah and Ahio? Sorry, I just kind of ruined the moment there. Uzzah and Ahio were driving the cart, and David and all Israel were celebrating before God with all their might, with song and lyres and harps and tambourines and cymbals and trumpets, and they were playing loudly before God. And verse 9, when they came to the threshing floor of Shidon, Uzzah put out his hand to take hold of the ark, for the oxen stumbled, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and he struck him down because he put out his hand to the ark, and he died there before God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. So in their zeal to bring the Lord into a new dwelling place, they use a brand new technology called a cart. Brand new, cutting-edge technology, about 2000 BC. And use it to transport the presence of the Lord. The oxen stumbled, and the cart with it, in an attempt to catch the ark. We read about this poor fellow named Uzzah, who was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, if you ask me. He gets zapped. The Lord's anger is kindled, it says, and that changes the conversation a little bit because they realize that even though what they were doing was good, there was good momentum in the right direction, bringing the presence of the Lord back into the center. They realized that the process of doing that, they had become a bit too casual with their approach and maybe not following the Lord, what the Lord had asked them to do. And in a surprising turn of events, even surprising to David, Uzzah actually loses his life. And David, he's angry at the Lord because he's like, what in the world? I'm trying to honor your presence, and we lose one of our own guys. And so David freaks out, and as do everybody else, as you and I would too, by the way. That's a moment you freak out. And David says, we cannot go any further. He says, Obed-Edom, we're putting the ark in your house for a few months. Which I don't know how that conversation went. We might all die, so Obed-Edom, how about you put this in your living room? And he must have been a really good friend. I don't actually know exactly how that works. I don't know what it means for the ark of God to go into his household, if it's a huge property. I cannot read this passage without having this picture of Obed-Edom waking up in the morning, like eating breakfast, just staring at this ark in the living room, just glowing. I don't know why. So that picture is now yours forever as you read this passage. But it didn't go badly for Obed-Edom, because the good news is where the presence of the Lord is, there is favor and there's blessing and there's life. And so the ark stays in his household, and it says while he was there, he just prospered and prospered and prospered and prospered. And that's what David knew. That's what David knew the whole time. We got to get the ark into the center of the people, of the center of the city. It cannot be peripheral to our lives. It has to be the centerpiece. So they said, all right, let's give it another shot. They gave it 3 months. Let's give it another shot. So 1 Chronicles 15, just if you actually have Bibles, just flip over a couple pages. 1 Chronicles 15, David calls them again. Verse 12. He says, you are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Consecrate yourselves, you and your brothers, so that you may bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, to the place that I have prepared for it. Because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us, because we did not seek him according to the rule. So the priests and the Levites consecrated themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Levites carried the ark of God on their shoulders with the poles, as Moses had commanded, according to the word of the Lord. So David and the people, they learned an important lesson. Just because his intentions and direction were good didn't mean that it was impossible to drift away from the Lord and his ways. Just because he was trying to correct something that had been out of place, and he was trying to bring the ark back in, he realized that it's still possible, even when we're following the Lord, to following our way and not his way. Right? And so he says, all right, we're going to go back to the prescription here, which was the ark was not meant to be on a cart. The ark was meant to be on the shoulders of the Levites, to be carried on the shoulders of image bearers of God. That we wouldn't invent a device to do the work for us to bring the presence in, but it will be ushered in on the shoulders of his people. It's so good. Amen. Come on. I'll take it. Even the dogs will cry out. Somewhere in the Bible. They wanted the presence of the Lord, but had to remember to seek the Lord in his ways and not become casual with his presence. And so there's a difference between being comfortable in his presence and approaching his presence boldly with confidence, and then being casual in his presence. I think even in a New Testament perspective, we have to understand this. You know, we're grateful that something new has happened in Christ. We are indwelt by the Spirit of God. So the new tabernacle of God, thankfully, it actually isn't another place we have to go to. We become, the people of God become the habitation of God. His dwelling is among us and in us and with us. And yeah, I do believe this principle in this passage actually does make the leap from the Old Testament to the New Testament, that there is this caution for us to not be too casual as it relates to how we are stewarding and living in the presence of God. That we don't just assume that we know that just because something great has been done for us, just because Jesus has made us pure and holy, and in his mercy he's wiped away every sin and guilt and shame, doesn't mean that the attention of our hearts can't drift in ways that could be dishonoring to him. Are you guys with me? And so David knew this, and this was kind of moving in his heart, and so he adjusted the plan as they were making their way back into the city. And there's a parallel passage. So we've been reading in the middle of 1 Chronicles, but if you switch over to, I think it's 2 Samuel. Blaze, I don't know if you have this. I think I maybe gave you the wrong reference, but 2 Samuel chapter 6. It's the parallel passage to this. Yeah, it's chapter 5, but we're gonna pick up in chapter 6. Verse 12. Let's see if we got it. And it was told King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all the belongings to him because of the ark of God. So that's good. Thumbs up for Obed-Edom. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of God had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. So they're on their way to bring the ark of the Lord back. They're carrying the ark on the shoulders. But this passage adds one more detail, which is pretty significant, that even as they were going, they would stop every 6 steps in order to offer a sacrifice before the Lord. And there's some scholars say there's some discrepancy with that, but we get a picture here that literally every 6 steps, there was a pause to worship. Every 6 steps, there was a pause to offer before the Lord a sacrifice. And why was that? Why was David doing that? You see, from Obed-Edom's house to Mount Zion is approximately 12 to 15 kilometers, making it about 30,000 paces. That means David and the whole nation stopped and sacrificed over 3,500 times. If it's true that they stopped every 6 steps on their way from Obed-Edom's house to the city, they interrupted themselves 3,500 times to remind themselves of the worth of God. See, God instructed them to carry the ark of the shoulder on the shoulders of the men, but nowhere does it say that God instructed him to do this. This is of David's doing. And I believe David was determined to have the presence of the Lord be at the center of the people, but realized even his plans could get in the way of seeking the Lord. So every 6 steps, he built in an interruption to their well-laid plans just to remind themselves that God is still worthy. I'm going to say it one more time. Every 6 steps, he built in an interruption to their plans to remind themselves that God is still worthy. And that's the thing with worship. True worship, it's often inefficient. It's often inconvenient. It's messy and it's costly. And the reason why we take so much time on a Sunday morning, and we probably sing more than a lot of churches in the area, and we have a lot of time of waiting and just, God, we want you, because there's true worship, there's a certain inefficiency to it. It's not about getting through something and getting to the goal. It's about every step reminding ourselves of who we've given ourselves to. And according to David, David was so concerned at this point in time of wanting the Lord to be honored that he had to start building in interruptions to their plan. And we even see in other parts of his life, he builds in interruptions to his life just to remind them that he is actually made to worship the Lord. And this is important for us today. See, to live with God at the center of our lives, it requires a lifestyle where we plan interruptions in the previously scheduled programming of our lives to remind ourselves to seek the face of the Lord. Do you do that? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? We have a previously scheduled program, and even in church life, we have previously scheduled programs, and the Lord oftentimes is okay with those things being interrupted so that our hearts can just turn back to Him, just to remind ourselves that He is still God and we are still His people, right? I was having this conversation with the Lord this last month. January is a little bit of a frustrating month for me because there's been a snowstorm about every Wednesday. And we got another one coming. God save us. Now, it's a good thing. We need the moisture. I love it. But secretly, I'm very angry at the Lord. Because I have plans midweek. I have meetings scheduled. God, don't you know I have church meetings scheduled during the week? I've been planning these things. We're talking about your work, God, And these things come, and our whole team has to move to Zoom, and then all the Omicron stuff, and we're all quarantining, and it was just like, oh my gosh. And I just felt the other day, I was driving, and I just felt the Lord just nudge me and say, hey, yeah, these interruptions are, he said, listen, if you're not going to plan to be interrupted, if you're not going to allow yourself to be interrupted, I'll take care of that work for you. And I just felt this invitation from the Lord in the middle of it, of I know what you're trying to do. I know what you want to do. What you want to do is good. But I'm allowing these interruptions to happen because I'm giving you an excuse to be distracted by me. And I think that's what we need. The Lord wants to distract us with him. He wants his presence he wants to be able to bring our attention back to him, even among the good work that we're doing, even among the work that you've been called to, and the work that you do on the day-to-day. There's this place of living in the Lord where we can either plan for interruptions in our day and build them into our day, or we can allow the Lord to interrupt us and say, hey, here's what I want to talk about today. And that's the thing with following God. So much of our calling to develop strength involves us the deliberate ordering of our lives around the presence of the Lord. And that means more than just being vaguely aware that we're practicing the presence of God. So sometimes in charismatic world, we're practicing the presence is everywhere. It's not in a church service. It's everywhere we go, and that's very true. But I think oftentimes if we go all in on that and don't allow our lives to be ordered around specific moments to make the Lord have front and center place, then we can end up in the same drift as the current of our culture, the current of what's happening as we get carried into the previously scheduled program of our lives. And so there's a deliberate nature to allowing ourselves to build in times during the day. So this was what David did all the time. And so we've lost this piece, but not all of us, but generally especially in evangelical culture, we've lost the piece. But for Jewish culture and most of church history, there's this whole idea called fixed hour prayer. It's the oldest surviving form of Christian spirituality, which had its roots, again, in the Old Testament. When David writes the psalm, 7 times a day do I praise you, it wasn't 7 spontaneous times a day. It was a legitimate time set aside on the calendar to say, whatever I'm doing today, as soon as that clock strikes, I'm called to worship. I'm going to stop what I'm doing and turn the attention of my heart towards the Lord because I live to worship him, and everything I do flows from him. And this is why all across the world, in historic Europe, anywhere where church buildings were built with the bells. I love when Piper talks about this, the bells that call the whole city to worship. The bells actually serve as a centerpiece in the city, and you hear that bell ring, it's a summons, it's a call to say, drop what you're doing, pause, and give glory to his name, give glory to the name of the Lord. David even worked this into his worship. He actually had to interrupt his worship with worship, which is wild. That's totally just mind blown. It's called a Selah. He literally, if you're reading through the Psalms, you're going to come across this word where he paused, and there's this word Selah, which just means we're going to pause and reflect. We're going to let the instruments play to the sound of this music. But how bizarre that we even have to interrupt our worship with worship, which is what we do. We have the songs that we start with, and we say, "No, let's show up. Let's give God what He's due." And there's moments where we have to interrupt our good worship services to worship again. And there's another layer here too. Why was it 6 steps? I was pondering on this the whole week. Why was it 6 steps that he took, and then worship? 6 steps and then worship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Worship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Worship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Worship. I don't believe it's accidental. There's a few ways to see this, but I believe it's a reference to the reality of the Sabbath rest of God. That man was created, Adam and Eve were created on day 6 and immediately went into day 7, which is a day set aside to enjoy God and to give him the worship and the glory that he's due. Day 6 is where we come to the end of our own strength and the end of our own ability, the end of our own bright ideas. Day 7, step 7 is where we say, I've come to the end of myself and I need you again, God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need you again, Jesus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need you again. Just even more than we did 6 steps ago, we need you again. And it's this built-in rhythm that we were made to be interrupted with the glory and the beauty of God. That's what we were made for. We were made to order our lives and not just wait for, not just waiting for God to interrupt us, but to interrupt our days saying, God, I'm here for you again. This is what fasting does. If you guys ever fast, it's a purposeful interruption into the way of life in order to remind yourself that we're hungry for God. So ultimately, this is what David gives his life to seeking the face of the Lord, to seeking the face of his God. And even as he's passing off the baton to his son Solomon, he encourages him. He says, seek the Lord, seek his face forevermore. Even in his old age, he knew that there is no other option. There's nothing else we can do than to order our lives around the presence of the Lord. So I just believe, I'm bringing it down just a little bit, for us to be reminded, listen, part of developing strength in the Lord is it requires a new deliberate entering into the life of God. It's more than just praying in your car on the way to a place, right? Some of you need to interrupt your inner world to remind yourself of what's true in the Lord. Some of you actually need to plan interruptions in your fear and anxiety to say that, God, you are still worthy of my worship right now. Some of you need to plan interruptions in your workday to say, God, you are the one, every good and perfect gift comes from you, and I'm working for you. You are my boss, ultimately. Christ Jesus is your boss. And when you interrupt in your workday and you take 10 minutes, you take your lunch break, you plan moments to say, I'm pulling away to remind myself. What it does is it reorders the flow of your day. No longer are you being pulled into the cares and the concerns that everybody else has for your life, that you have for your life, but you're reminding yourself, I am made to give myself to the one who reigns above it all. God's design for our lives is to interrupt our week every 6 days, to give a day that is set apart to Him. I think it's part of the reason why even believers are very fatigued and actually don't know how to enter into the rest of God, because we haven't actually been taught the difference between a Sabbath holy unto the Lord and checking out and binging on Netflix all day. Okay? We actually don't, we do exactly what the culture does. And when I say culture, I'm not saying the bad guys out there. I'm just saying this is just the way, it's not a us and them thing. But what I'm saying is we have to relearn rhythms of grace. We have to relearn what it looks like to order ourselves deliberately, because if we don't, we get pulled. And then the things of God we become indifferent towards. And just like Saul, the presence of God found its way to the margins of society, not to the center. That's exactly what happens in our lives, where the presence of God is ornamental. It's something it's like an optional add-on that will make us feel good once a week or every now and then when we think about it. But I believe that the Lord is saying, no, who are the people who are going to reorder their lives around the pursuit of my presence, the attention of their hearts given to me, where they're willing to let themselves be interrupted and planning in every 6 steps so that I can get my glory, and my glory can be known in all of the earth. And so we pause. And even when we pause for worship, even when we come to gathering, this is why gathering is so important. I know some of us think, well, yeah, but this is more than just church services, and it's true. Church is more than gatherings and services. It is more, but it's not less than that. So a life with Jesus is more than church services, but it's not less than gatherings with the people of God. And so even you getting out of bed this morning and coming in and making that a deliberate act, what you're doing is saying, my life is more than me just trying to do my own thing way over here, but I'm part of a story of the people of God coming to worship so his name can be made great among us. I'm reminding myself that it's bigger than my own isolated experience. Yeah? So that's part of what we're doing. That's why this is massive. That's why everything that we do is consequential. Everything that we do is consequential. And I bring all of this because this week, again, I believe the Lord was even confronting me on this. Will you allow yourself to be interrupted? Will you allow your plans to be interrupted if I have something new that I'm doing? And I'm just realizing, there's certain things that we perceive from the Lord. This is what you want us to do. And even in that, there's this continuing to return to him and say, God, but what now? What now? What are you doing now? What do you have to say now? And not assuming that I know best all the time. And I believe it's the same with all of us here. When you start your day tomorrow, when you show up to a work, you know how your day is going to go. But what if you were to pause and build in moments to remind yourself, the Lord is good and his mercy never ends. The Lord is good and his love endures forever. What if you just built it into your phone, just wrote it down in your calendar? I'm going to stop what I'm doing. No matter what I'm doing, I'm going to schedule an appointment into my calendar just like I do all of my other Zoom calls. And I have an appointment with Jesus. And what I'm going to do is declare to him, you are good and your love endures forever. And guys, this is part of this life, this life cycle, this posturing that I believe is going to be critical in days ahead, that you're taking responsibility. You're deciding your worship, it matters. You are deciding that I will be a person who worships. And the only way to build that in is to every 6 steps say, Jesus, you were worthy of a messy, costly sacrifice right now. Whatever I have to sacrifice, I'm bringing it because you are worthy of it. So let's stand. Piper, you can come up. Let's just take a moment. We're just going to be quiet together. Just listen for Jesus across the room.